Hi. In this film I'm going to explain meta-ethics in general terms. And when we talk about meta-ethics, we're trying to examine two things. One is the meaning of the word good. Meta-ethics means beyond ethics, behind ethics. What lies underneath the idea of a moral statement? So first of all, we have a question of meaning. And secondly, we have a question that is linked to that, and that is, what is the foundation for the idea of goodness? So meta-ethics is really about meaning and foundations, and those two issues are linked. Now, the basic issue in ethics and meta-ethics is, can we derive the idea of moral goodness from some natural feature of the world? That's a natural feature that could, for example, in Christian natural law, be designed into us by God in our rational human natures. Or it could be a natural feature in terms of the kind of pleasure and pain that all of us share as an experience a posteriori, which to a utilitarian gives us an intrinsic idea of goodness that is naturalistic. It's based on experience. Now, the problem with naturalism is sometimes explained in this way. Something causes me pleasure, and a utilitarian says, therefore, this action is good. And it begs a very important question, simple to describe and explain, and that is, what is so good about pleasure? So the question it begs is, it may be pleasurable, but is it good? Imagine that I'm your grandparent and you say to me, I'm going to go to Kudos nightclub, it happens to be the one down the road where I live, and I'm going to have a great time on Saturday. I'm going to get plastered, I'm going to drink too much, I'm going to smoke some dubious substances, and I'm going to go fairly crazy with my friends. Now, I would say to you as a grandparent, that may be pleasurable, but is it morally good? Is it a good idea to behave like that? And naturalistic facts, therefore, beg a very important question. For a utilitarian, pleasure is good simply, Mill says, because everybody desires it. So it's part of our shared experience, the kind of things that we desire. Everybody desires pleasure, everybody avoids pain, says Mill. And that's as far as his argument goes. From this idea of naturalism, we get the concept of the naturalistic fallacy. And this is sometimes described as the feature that you cannot derive a prescriptive statement, an ought statement, from a descriptive statement, an is statement, in the way that I've just been explaining. You cannot derive an ought from an is, some people say. But actually, this is a misstatement of what is going on, because it comes from an argument of David Hume in the 18th century. He pointed out that people slip from making descriptive statements to moral statements with the word ought or good in them without explaining the missing premise, that stage of the argument that I've just described. So the naturalistic fallacy is really a missing premise accusation. It's saying, according to David Hume, if you're going to do this, you need to provide a missing premise, a missing stage of the argument. So it might go like this. Brian has promised to pay me £100. Promising, this is the missing premise bit, promising includes the idea of obligation. If you make a promise, everybody knows you should pay the money back. That's what promising means. Conclusion, therefore, Brian should pay me £100. So I've moved there from the is statement, Brian just owes me £100, to an ought statement, Brian ought to pay me back, by supplying a missing premise that explains how you move from the is to the ought. So it is possible to supply the missing premise, and we have to decide whether the utilitarians who are naturalists, the natural law theorists who are naturalists, not Kant, because he's not a naturalist, but how those two theories, for example, supply that missing premise and whether we think their argument makes sense. Finally, a word about emotivism. A.J. Ayer said there is no such thing as a moral fact. So when we say that something is good, we're not pointing to any factual feature of the action itself. So, for example, I come across a dead body, fact. I conclude that's murder, and I then say, that's so wicked. Somebody's murdered this person. What I've done is I haven't added anything to the factual features that I'm observing and indeed describing. What I'm doing is I'm spraying it, in a sense, with an emotive gloss, with an attitude, an expression of an attitude of disapproval. So, from this argument, we get the fairly bold conclusion, and indeed one that is contestable, you can argue against it, that moral statements are merely an expression of emotion. Sometimes emotivism is called expressivism for that reason. And when I say that's murder, it's really wicked, it's really bad, you should not murder, I am really, according to A.J. Ayer, just simply expressing yuck, murder.